Hi everyone. Get your attention a bit. Okay, so we'll get started in a minute here. So thanks to all of you for coming by. As you probably know by now, if you've been here before, we usually do short presentation, maybe 30, 40 minutes, and then the rest will be networking. So at the end of this presentation, we'll take away the chairs, and then you can stay here as long as we kick you out pretty much. So yeah, and if it's your first time, thanks for coming. So that's us, Santosh and I. We're both investor-focused realtors. Unfortunately, Lane couldn't come tonight. He's sick right now, but usually he's part of us as well. Before we start, just to let you know, obviously, we're going to be talking about lots of different things tonight, but make sure you talk to financial advisor, mortgage brokers, etc., before you make financial decisions. And we know there might be other industry professionals in the room, mortgage brokers, realtors. That's all good. We just ask that you don't promote your business, don't pass business cards. We ask that you're here to learn, not to network. And same thing if you've got the MLM or something like that, it's not really a place to promote your business. So we'll get started. So how many of you, by show of hand, have heard about the housing strategy that was in the news like maybe 2 weeks ago? Okay, yeah, a few of you.
Quite a few of you.
Yeah, so essentially the city of Calgary went to City Hall and had a public hearing to decide what to do with the affordability crisis that's happening right now, especially on the rental side. Obviously, we do have something we need to address, and they've came up with some of these points of why we need to do something about it, right? So according to the city of Calgary, there's 84,000 households right now that can't afford where they currently live. And that's based on 30% of the median renter's income is considered as affordable. And then last year, we had 42,000 people move to Calgary, which is the biggest we've ever got in a year in Calgary's history, right? Why we have that problem now, that's one of the big reasons, right? We've got all these people moving in, and we're not keeping up with the pace of new rental units. And the city expects 110,000 people in the next 4 years. So it's not like that problem is going to stop, right? We keep having more and more people moving in. To tie into that, rental vacancy rate went down from 6 to 3% in only 2 years, right? That's half. And 6% is already not that high, right? 3% is really low for rental vacancy. And average rents went up 40% between 2020 and 2023. That being said, we did have 5 years or so of flat, and even declining rents before that, right? So if we were to look back at the average over the past 7-8 years, it didn't go up 40% over 7-8 years, right? But it did compared to 2020, which for a lot of tenants is difficult to swallow, right? If you used to pay $1,500 and now you're paying over $2,000, that's a big difference in your budget. So in the average detached house went up 37% between 2020 and 2023. So not just the rental market, right? The housing market's going up a lot as well. We see it as realtors. Income properties as well are going up pretty fast. So that's essentially why the city met and had to talk about that. So that's what they came up with. So they have those 5 main pillars that they talked about, right? So obviously the number one, I think, is the one that probably is the most relevant to us real estate investors, is increase the supply of housing and to meet demand and increase affordability, right? So that's a great opportunity for us, and I'll talk about why, right? It's going to be things we can do to be part of the solution. Support affordable housing providers, that's also something that some of us might be able to play into, right? It's likely a bit more of an advanced strategy. And obviously the last 3 points are less relevant to us, but still important points that the city needs to work on. So some of the key points of that strategy, because that has been approved with some amendments, which I'll show after. First one is actually a pretty big deal. So, and that's the one actually that's been the most controversial, right? Some people have been pretty vocal about this point, is the city will be making the based zoning RCG. So RC1 is going to be gone, right? R1, R2. Now every every property, every lot's going to start at RCG and up, right? What does that mean? We'll talk about that after, right? Because it's not necessarily as scary as it sounds. And then they plan to do that by Q2 of 2024, so mid next year. Another one that's a really big deal for us, I think I was pretty excited to see this one. I think it should have been done a long time ago, is to enable both secondary suites and backyard suites on the same parcel of land, right? Because right now it's not legal. So if you have a backyard suite and you want to add a basement suite, even if you follow all the regulations and all the permitting, you still can't do it, right? So they're going to enable that, which I think is a really big deal, especially for new build. Now it gives more opportunities to builders to have different products that maybe are at a higher price point, but because they have 3 units now might actually start to make sense for some investors, right? And that other point actually ties into that as well, is the city is looking at ensuring that parking minimums don't act as a barrier to affordability. What does that mean? Originally, the city was going to remove all parking requirements. They've kind of stepped back a little bit on that. Now it's going to be location dependent, which I personally think is a better approach. So what it means is now if you've got a massive lot, like 70 by 120 or something like that, corner lot, the parking requirements that will be placed on you are not going to be the same as if you have like a 25-foot wide lot, right? Which only makes sense, right? Because as it is right now, you need 1 parking per unit, right? If you're doing a secondary suite, which means if you did a basement suite and a backyard suite, you need 3 parking stalls. But that might not be the case with what they're bringing in, especially if you have a large lot. Because right now, street parking doesn't count either, right? And then that's also a big one, and we'll talk about the downside of that, is the city will launch an incentive program for new basement suites of $10,000 to produce at least 400 net secondary suite each year. So the wording is not necessarily clear if they're going to cap that grant or not, but they will be providing $10,000 per new secondary suites. And then the last point that I think is relevant to real estate investors is to support residential, like a cap, essentially
rent control model.
Rent control, yeah. Obviously, it's a wording that's a little concerning to I think a lot of people in the room. That being said, the city doesn't actually have authority in putting rent control, right? But what they plan on doing is essentially lobbying to the province, right? And realistically, if enough municipalities start to lobby to the province on top of tenants and everything, then they could start to weigh some changes, right? So it's not a direct impact, but it is something that's in the realm of possibilities, right? We personally feel like it's not super likely, but yeah, there's still a certain risk out there of that happening. Just to be clear, these are not all the points of the strategy. These are just some of the key points I thought might be relevant to the room here. I'd really welcome all of you to read the full strategy. It's interesting to know what's coming, right? So it's not going to be a surprise for any of us. After that, so as I mentioned, the city has actually approved the strategy in its entirety, with the exceptions of these amendments. And they're actually interesting ones. So yeah, leveraging city-owned sites for emergency housing for families. So that might come into play more as a subsidized housing type of thing. Downtown conversions. I think you might have heard about this before. They've been talking about it for a while. We've got really high vacancy with commercial units downtown. And at the same time, we have really low vacancy for residential units, right? So the city is actually providing grants to convert some of these units. They're actually subsidized conversions. So it sounds like they're going to continue those incentives and potentially increase them as well. That middle one is interesting. Investigating business licensing for residential landlord. So how's that going to look like? That's a good question, right? Are they going to require that you prove you've got some sort of, skill set or something? I doubt, but it sounds like they'll treat you the same as a business, the same as if you're a plumber, an electrician, or something like that, where if you have a property here, your business, and you might need to get a business license. And by the way, that's already how it is done for short-term rental. If you have an Airbnb right now, you need to apply for business license. If you have two Airbnb for a suite, you need two business license, right? So that seems to be the direction they're going to be taking for long-term rentals as well. So that's one of the amendments they brought forward. Considering infrastructure investment for increased density, we'll cover that later on. Actually, there's other things that tie into that. And adding reporting considerations for planning application processes. So the main goal of that last point, I think, is just to streamline applications. The city is recognizing that some of the development applications are taking too long or maybe redundant. So it looks like they're looking at reporting on all these applications so they can make changes in the future. And then we'll talk about RCG because that's a big point of that strategy. So Santosh will tell you a bit about that.
All right, so yeah, RCG has been touted as the base residential zoning that's about to be happening next year. And what RCG is going to enable is you're going to be able to build a row house style, up to a row house style development on a residential unit, residential lot, right? Whether it's an interior lot or a corner lot, and you might be able to build front and back units. So previously, the city said all the units on an RCG have to be street facing, right? Which is a big reason why corner lots were really popular among developers because you get two street facing sides. Whereas now even on an interior lot, you can build front to back units along with a garage in the back. So I think we're going to start to see a lot more of these developments happening. That being said, it is still approval is still dependent. It's a contextual approval. So if your lot's too narrow to squeeze enough units in, or if you're not close enough to transit and you can't meet adequate parking for the location. So if you live in a far suburb and you don't have good transit, then they're not going to waive some of the parking requirements, right?
And part of the context, by the way, which was part of the one thing that scared a lot of people, is if you're like, I don't know, in Aspen Woods and all there is single family homes, they may consider that as a context for not allowing that project, right? That being said, the city has also said that they actually want all neighborhoods to include those type of projects. So nowhere is excluded from it, but they do consider the context of how the project is going to look in that neighborhood. So it's not an automatic approval everywhere, right?
Yeah, exactly. And to add to the confusion, a lot of properties also have restrictive covenants and caveats on them where you can't build more than a certain density. So that's a whole other issue that needs to also be addressed. So. But in terms of how many suites that you can build, there is a calculation that the city will be using. It depends on kind of the lot size, and they have a formula to work out the max allowable units on any given lot. What's going to happen next with this housing strategy is, according to the city, they're going to get started right away on all the stuff that doesn't require any approval from budget perspective. And for anything that needs budgetary approval, it's going to be decided somewhere around November of this year when the budget for next year gets announced. Anything that requires a land use or bylaw change to something like the RCG zoning or any other proposed zoning changes will be more than likely decided in Q2 of 2024. That's what the city's website has right now as their timeline. But that could, of course, change. It could be sooner or slightly later. So the next thing that I wanted to cover was the secondary suite program. How many of you here have used the secondary suite program or have a suite or have gone through the process at all?
The Amnesty program.
The Amnesty program, yeah. Okay, so quite a few of you. Okay, so that program is unfortunately ending at the end of this year. We've had a chat with the city planner a few months ago, and it doesn't seem like they are very motivated to extend the Amnesty program. Given that they're coming out with the $10,000 per suite grant for new suites, they're not very keen on extending the existing illegal to legal suite conversion program. Now, if you do have a property with an existing illegal suite that was built prior to March 2018, I would highly recommend get in on this program and get that legalized before it ends. It's ending December 31st of this year. So according to the city, if you have your permits in place, you can continue your work into 2024. You just need to have started the process by the end of the year. Okay. And yeah, as part of that Amnesty program, the development permit and registry fees are waived. So that's about a $700 savings right there. So starting next year with the new suite requirements, every suite will have to meet this whole host of requirements as opposed to existing suite minimum requirements. So as you can see, the list is quite a bit longer, and with that comes cost. So a new suite today costs roughly about $80,000, give or take, for a 2-bedroom basement suite, right? And that's if you have a separate entrance already. And if you don't have a separate entrance, you can budget about $15,000 to $20,000 if you have a typical 2-story home and you need to cut your foundation, build stairs, and all that kind of stuff. The main thing that's going to add to your cost with a new suite would be the entrance and the 2 sources of heating. And you can do this in a few different ways. You can either do electric baseboard heating for the basement suite and use your furnace for the main floor. We've also seen 2 furnaces, but the problem with older houses is the ceiling height is often fairly low. So if you start adding so many pieces of ductwork, then you have a very low ceiling height, which becomes a bit problematic as well, right? And the last way to kind of achieve this 2 separate sources of heating would be to use a combi boiler. So a boiler would serve the basement suite, and you'd use the furnace for the upstairs. And that way you still have 2 separate sources of heating for both units. Okay? And another one that also adds to the cost would be backflow prevention devices. So the city, when you build a new suite, the plumbing inspector is going to require a backflow valve to protect against sewer backups. So if you have an older home, odds are you probably don't have this backflow valve installed already. So that can be pretty costly, especially if you have a finished basement and your sewer line runs right below the finished floor. What do we expect for investment properties in 2024? This is just kind of our prediction. We're expecting that all suites that are still illegal past this year could lose some value as opposed to if they were legalized today under the suite program. And we're going to start to see probably a lot more new suites coming up on the market, and properties that have unfinished basements or basements that are really run down that would make good candidates for these new suite projects will actually gain in popularity, because a lot of investors would rather buy something that's already run down, so they're not paying for that nice basement that they're going to have to tear out. And then in general, we're going to probably see a worsening trade shortage, because new suites, they do take a fair bit of time to construct. There's a lot going on, lots of permitting.
And all those development too, right?
Yeah.
Like all those row house projects, things like that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And with a lot of these new suite projects, homeowners cannot pull their own permits for a good chunk of it. You'll need ticketed trades to pull permits, so that definitely possibly could add to delays and stuff. We do anticipate that corner lots or lots with potential for high density projects will continue to grow in price, especially now that zoning approvals for building would get easier. One interesting thing that could happen is surrounding cities around Calgary, Airdrie, Chestermere, so on and so forth, can actually become more popular among investors, because the requirements to build a new suite are going to be the same. Like currently, people prefer to buy an existing illegal suite in Calgary versus do a new suite project in Airdrie. But starting next year, it's kind of a level playing field, right? And the only advantage is your price points are going to be much lower if you buy in Airdrie or Cochrane as opposed to Calgary. Those cities could also become more popular among investors. Yeah, I think that's about all we had for today. Do you guys have any questions?
So the question is about secondary suite that you're about to develop. So I'll consider my example. I was planning to develop my secondary suite now. Good idea to do it now, or good idea to do it next year with the new requirements?
No, you're better to do it now, because even though you get a grant next year, the cost to do it is significantly higher, right?
Yeah.
You already have an existing illegal suite, right?
It's not a legal suite.
Oh, okay, doesn't. Yeah,
Unfinished,
in this case, then I would wait to next year, right?
Yeah.
And utilize the grant. Yeah.
There's pros and cons. If you could do it now and you won't get the grant, but there's a chance you might not get the grant next year either, because it's up to 400 units. At least that's the wording that the city is using right now.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure the moment they launch the program, everyone's going to click the button.
Well, actually, the wording right now is to create at least 400
Yeah.
units, but it's not clear if they'll have a cap on the amount
Then
of
what's the
grants. So.
disadvantage of doing it right now, apart from the grant? the comparison table that you showed about what are the requirements now and what are the requirements in future.
So we need to clarify that the comparison is not the requirements right now and the requirements in the future. It's the requirements if you have an existing suite built prior to 2018 or the requirements for new suite.
Yeah.
So the requirements for new suite today are the exact same that they're going to be next year.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you
So the,
doesn't matter.
the dual furnaces and double boilers.
You still need to do
required
that.
today.
Yeah.
Backflow. So it's still
Yeah.
required to do
Yeah.
now. As
Mhm.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
the
why
only
do you
difference
think
is if you have a
pricing
suite before that was built before 2018, now you can still legalize it with that limited set of requirements.
And why did you say the pricing of constructing the basement is going to go up? It's already so up with all these.
Well, between an existing suite and a new suite,
Yeah, because
the requirements are much higher in building a suite from scratch than legalizing an existing illegal suite. So if today you have an illegal suite,
Mhm.
it's going to cost you a lot more to legalize that suite next year than this year.
But
because you have-
and the develop you can.
It's yeah.
if it's
gonna stay,
unfinished,
yeah.
then it's the same
It's the same
process,
process.
regardless of whether you do it now or next year. So
If I legalize my suite, how much would it add to my like expenses, property tax, and like the running cost for that?
I mean, generally, it doesn't add a whole bunch to your property tax
Like what the
$100
city is going to
bucks or
do is
something like
they'll do an appraisal, right?
Yeah.
So it's not going to be immediate, but at the next tax roll, they'll consider that new suite as part of your property value, and then your tax will go in accordance to that, right?
Yeah.
It's usually not all that bad,
like
sometimes
$100.
Yeah,
ish,
but
give or
it will
take,
go
yeah.
up based on
Yeah.
that suite.
But
So.
the cost is minimal to
Yeah,
the
yeah,
disadvantages
yeah.
of not doing it.
Yeah, for sure.
I've never seen a scenario in which your tax goes up higher than your cash flow goes up,
Okay.
Yeah.
right? You're gonna get extra rent, like yes, you'll pay an extra $100,
I'm talking
but
about a primary residence here, so
Yeah.
it wouldn't be like much.
Right.
No.
Mhm.
So how do you guys see the issue today with the housing prices related to this? 'Cause this plan seems to be very ambiguous in places, and but it's trying to address a growing problem, the housing prices, right, by adding more offers in the market. But isn't this going to drive the housing prices not just to stay stable, but to increase even more? Because now we're starting to fall into our RCG zone, free zone, which is now the 1910 house that is downtown is now 6 houses. And now the pricing of that zone has a different price which was before. So the neighbor now is saying, you sold it for 1.5 million, I'm gonna sell it for 2, and vice versa. So now you got a daisy chain scenario. So a plan that is necessarily trying to address the housing crisis is now creating another problem.
So you have a very good point. In some areas, we expect that's going to be 100% the case. So in areas where you can do those type of developments, especially if they're like nice lots, corner lots, or wider lots, right? Those are going to be in really high demand. We expect in the next few years. Part of it is the base zoning, right? But another part of it is there's a lot of pressure to build more units, more rental units, and increase density, right? So developers are going to be fighting over those lots for sure, right? That being said, is that going to affect you a lot in Legacy? Not really, right? Or in the suburb or something, right? But there are some lots, to your point, that for sure those homes are going to go up in value just based on land value. So we're already starting to see it, especially in areas. There's a new zoning that was launched as well earlier this year called Age Go.
Yeah.
That's a zoning that allows actually much higher density projects. You can do 60, 70, 80 units sometimes, as long as you're close to some transit corridors. Those areas, we've already seen those lots go up. And we've already seen developers picking them up. You know, sometimes they'll buy like a bunch at a time, right? Like 3 or 4 neighbors at a time. So yeah, for sure, there'll be some of that.
The housing crisis problem by offers, when you're creating an affordability problem.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it's a targeted affordability problem, but it's a short-term pain for long-term gain.
Yes.
I think their plan will help in the long term, but in the short term, like everything that the city announced is not going to change anything to the affordability crisis right now, right? That's like a 5-10 year down the road plan, right? So it's going to take a while to build those.
It's more to
units.
address the supply-demand issue, not so much the price at this point, right? So, yeah, Peter, yeah.
Your question, you need to define what you're wanting to solve. The prices of rental or the prices of a purchaser, of ownership. Those are two different solutions. You're going to increase, like what you're saying, like you take a house and you kind of divide it into smaller units. You'll be able to address the the rental supply, one, and the rental affordability. So instead of a single occupant home building, it's become a 4-unit.
Yeah, that's right.
4 tenants, 4 families can live there.
Yeah.
The attic will be more cramped, smaller. It's not super luxurious like a 4,000 square foot home with one family. You're gonna have 1,000 square foot per family.
Yeah.
The thing is, yes, that single family home became a fourplex. So you're gonna sell it as a fourplex, not a single family. It's gonna hit you on the purchase side. The thing is, it's been upgraded to 4 units, 4 furnace, 4 hot water tank, 4 titles, 4.
Yeah.
Everything is 4. So of course it's going to be worth more because you've elevated the structure to a 4-plex.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that is right.
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Property from a single family.
Yeah, yeah. If you own all 4 units, yeah, it becomes more of a commercial property.
And that's actually a good point. That's a good plan for city's revenue as well, right? Because now you're going
More
from one
tax.
house that might be worth 600K, right, on a 50-foot wide lot. Now suddenly you've got a project that's worth maybe $2-3 million, right? Bringing in a lot more tax revenue, but the infrastructure is the same. You still have that same street to service, right?
Yeah.
So tax revenue wise, it makes a lot of sense for the city to do this.
It's just like when you you develop your basement suite into a suite, right? Like it's gonna go up in value your house. So if
Yep.
you say, well, you made it even more unaffordable. Well, the thing is now you have 2 families living in this one structure. You doubled the density, if I may, for that area of land, right?
Yeah, so you're increasing the supply, but not necessarily solving the affordability part of it. So yeah.
Where would you say are the hot zones for this strategy in Calgary?
With this RCG kind of development strategy, it's probably going to be pretty concentrated in the kind of inner city areas, kind of right anywhere around the core, downtown core, Highland Park, Roscarra, Glendale, Killarney, Altadore, Marda Loop, right? Well, Marda Loop's already kind of out of control right now, but yeah.
Pretty much anywhere.
Yeah, near transit, transit oriented.
Well, near transit is actually kind of a double whammy because you also get the HGO zoning that pushes
Even
property
higher.
value up, right? But essentially anywhere from like the 60s, 70s, 80s, even 50s, where you have bungalow with large lots, right? Because the key of this is you want large lot, and ideally you want the crappiest house possible, right?
Yeah.
So that's usually those older homes, right? There's a lot of 800, 700 square feet homes on like massive 60, 70 foot wide lots, right? Those are the areas that are going to get the biggest push in land value. You're tearing down the house anyway, so no developer cares about the house. They just want a nice big lot.
Is the HGO an automatic city move, or you need to apply for that?
Yeah, so HGO is a bit different. It's not going to be rezoned to HGO, but it's a permitted use where if you meet all of the requirements, they will grant a development. But that being said, it's still contextual, right? So there's still going to be a sandwich board on the lawn, right? Like the neighbors still get to peel it. The city still gets to review it. But the city doesn't really get to say, no, we don't want this until there's a lot of feedback against it, right? But no, it's not going to be blanket rezone, right? There's not going to be a lot that's like an HGO lot now unless you've actually applied to make that happen. Where the RCG, they're planning to do the blanket rezoning, right? So now your R1 lot's going to be an RCG lot.
I have another question. So the people who have an illegal basement suite, if they try to get it legalized now, so would that work? Would that be a better option than doing it next year with a whole lot of cost?
Of course,
Yeah, of
yeah. Right
course,
now, if you have an
because-
illegal suite to Center's
Yeah,
Point,
because then you can
do it
follow
now,
the
right?
minimum.
So is that the reason the houses with illegal suites in Northeast they're going up really fast with investors? Is that the reason?
they are in pretty hot demand right now,
Yeah,
for sure.
and-
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why they're pretty hot, especially today, is because interest rates are high. And if you have that legal suite, it helps a lot of buyers qualify, right? It gives you that extra boost in qualifying power that you needed to get that house, right? Whereas with an illegal suite, you don't get that benefit.
What's the approximate cost these days to legalize an illegal suite?
It really depends on the project, but in most cases, most properties need like interconnected smoke alarms between up and down. It might need an egress window, right? It typically costs about $2,500 to $3,000 per window if you need to cut the concrete, do everything. And yeah, drywalling the mechanical room is a pretty common one.
And with the city, how much do you have to pay?
The city, I think all you need to do is a building permit application, which is like $200, something like that.
Even
Yeah.
if you need a development permit, it's free right now.
Yeah.
It's part of the Amnesty, so city side is pretty cheap.
Yeah.
If you have to plumbing permit, electrical permit, those are pretty cheap as well, like $100 or so each.
Yeah, we'll go with your question first, and then I'll go to you.
Has this new zoning been priced into property values?
Not yet.
No.
So with the row housing,
And sorry, just to finish your point, like it's gonna take a bit of time before it really starts to affect the pricing for a few reasons. Even though people know it's happening, there's still a bit of a lag, right? First of all, if you buy a property today, you need to wait, right? It's not happening until like mid next year. And if your plan is to tear it down, then that's just carrying costs that you're incurring, right? So yes, people are gonna start to shop for those, I think, more, but until that's actually happened, it's not going to have the full effect on the price increase.
So you can see it jumping up once it actually happens.
Yeah, and I don't think it's going to be like a 0 to
Yeah.
1, right? But it will gradually get there.
creep
Yeah.
up, yeah. Your question?
So with the row housing, I see, is it the developer who decides if they're gonna keep it as a single owner property versus a condo corporation? Who decides that if they can build?
Typically, those are not typically done as condos, but
Yeah.
they could be. But yeah, it's the developer, right? The builder gets the freedom of kind of choosing the ownership structure to some extent.
Are there any advantages versus disadvantages? How will you tackle that? Like, let's say if you are on a corner lot and you have 6 row houses,
Right.
and I've seen some of them becoming a condo corp, right? Are there advantages to the city on that regard, or it doesn't matter to them?
As far as the city's concerned, there's no real advantages, but it might be advantages to the owners or who are living in these units if there's a condo structure, because then there would be some sort of reserve fund, right, to tackle capital expenses like roof replacements and stuff like that.
On your earlier slide, you said home values might go down with the illegal suite. Can you maybe just describe that?
Yeah, so I think the point I was trying to make there is illegal suites that are not legalized by the end of this year, and they remain illegal into 2024, they could lose their value because it's going to be a much harder process for someone to now buy that property and legalize it because they have to follow the new suite requirements, right? Whereas it would have been a lot cheaper if they had started the process this year, right? So
Yeah, because in an interesting way, if you take an illegal suite and try to legalize it next year, in some cases it's almost harder than starting with a fresh basement, right? You need to rip out so much stuff. You're not going to want to pay a premium to do demo work on it, right? So it's not going to have the same demand as now. Anyone in the room is willing to pay a premium for that illegal suite because you save on the cost of getting a legal
So
unit.
let's say if you bought a home with an illegal suite next year,
Mhm.
you get your price down, but you could continue operating as an.
Correct.
So would you want to run a few random numbers about this? Like suppose 500,000 is the price for a 3,050 square feet of a property somewhere, and then there's an illegal suite. So next year, if the person buys it today, the investor buys it today, and then they convert it into a legal one, that cost. And then the next year, by the end of the year, because of everything changing, how much would the cost go up? Approximately.
well, it's
It really
hard
depends,
to
yeah.
it's hard to tell you how much it'll possibly appreciate
It will
it
just go
by.
by the price of the placement. How would it be treated as a property without a basement unit, and then you suddenly?
Are you talking about the purchase price or the cost to
Yeah.
the
Purchase price.
Like-
How
renovation
would the
price?
prices change? I mean,
Like the
you're
lift in
gonna buy it
value.
today and sell it,
Yeah,
and
the
then
lift
next
in
year
value,
you're
So
gonna-
we can give you a rough number, right? So this is a guideline for appraisers. It's not a hard and fast rule, but if a property had an existing illegal suite and it was made into a legal suite, assuming no other renovations have been done, it typically adds about $20,000 to $30,000 to the property just to have that status, right? Now, if it was a brand new suite, it has 2 furnaces and everything, it typically adds about $50,000, sometimes $60,000 to $65,000, right? Depending on the
Usually as
location.
the value we have put into the basement, how much money you put
Yeah.
into it, and then
Not in full. So, like I said, a new suite costs about $80,000,
yeah.
but the value you get is only about anywhere from 50 to 65, right? So,
Thank you.
yeah.
And yeah, that might change next year.
yeah, that might change. Yeah. So,
There is a house and it's a small house. It's a good sized lot, but the basement is small and somebody who lives there, they have a bathroom and they have a separate entrance and they have like a washing facility, separate room. But they don't necessarily have like a kitchen. would you recommend to do something about it? Because it seems like people who live there, they're totally fine with not having, a stove.
So that's actually a good point. What constitutes an illegal suite, right?
Yeah.
To be classified as an illegal suite, it needs to have a separate entrance, needs to have a cooking facility, which is typically a stove, right, in a kitchen, needs to have a bathroom, and it needs to have, I'm missing another one, I think. Yeah, obviously.
yeah.
No, it doesn't have to have an
No.
egress window, right, because it's illegal. Not even actually. Yeah. So to your point, if there's no cooking facility, it's not an illegal suite. And conversely, the city doesn't really care, honestly. Like, you can just keep renting that.
It's just considered a finished basement in the eyes of the city.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Even if it's a separate entrance.
Yeah, even because there's no cooking facility, right? So there's no, like, someone can't technically fully live in that unit because if you can't cook, then
We see that a lot on the market. There's a lot of misunderstanding about what's an illegal suite, right? We see it all the time. We'll see wet bars classified as an illegal suite. We'll see like somewhat of a kitchen classified. Like, if it doesn't have a kitchen, a cooking facility, a bathroom, it's not an illegal suite, period, right? The city's not going to look at it as such.
So one of the contractors I have dealt with mentioned fire protection, that if you have a basement suite, it needs to have fire rated drywall, making it a separate. So if a fire starts upstairs, it's not coming down, or vice versa, right? Is that a thing with the new regulations, or that's
For both.
So I'll actually correct you on that. You don't need to have 5/8 drywall. It's not a fire separation. It's a smoke seal that the city is going for. So the minimum that the city requires is 1/2 inch on all surfaces in the unit. Okay, so walls and ceilings. But you might want to use 5/8 for soundproofing reasons, right? Especially on the ceiling. So
the contractor's getting away is just by doubling the drywall is what I understand.
no, you don't have to do double 5/8 because double 5/8 is a fire. Like, if you need a fire rating, that's like, it's more of a commercial application, right? All you need is the minimum code requirement is 1/2 inch drywall, and you might want to use a layer of 5/8 on the ceiling instead. So.
And the door has to be the fire rated.
Yeah, that's right. So the entry to the suite needs to be a solid door, and if you have a common area, the main floor, like if you have a common entrance and there's up and down suite entrances, both doors have to be solid.
Yeah, furnace
doors.
room, self-closing, and
that's right.
solid door.
You mentioned about the housing shortage. Do you think that the federal or the provincial will cap the rent? And my second question would be, is with these interest environment, as an investor, with all the cost, is it could you normally get a positive cash flows?
Okay. So I'll answer your first question. Do we think there might be a rent control type situation coming in? Between both of us, our opinion is it's fairly unlikely because Calgary is kind of experiencing the brunt of the problem. But
And by the way, sorry, just to clarify one thing, you talked about federal government. That's a provincial jurisdiction.
Yeah.
So the federal government could obviously somewhat force the provinces to adopt it, but it's a provincial decision.
Yeah.
And given we have a conservative government.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's fairly unlikely that we think rent control is going to happen, especially since only Calgary is mainly experiencing this issue. Edmonton has a similar issue, but it's not to the same extent, right? So a lot of people are moving to Alberta if they want something a bit more affordable. Edmonton's the way to go, right? And your second question was, can you still find positive cash flow in the city? Yes. In fact, we're still helping investors find positive cash flow properties. So.
It's harder than it used to be, but still more than possible.
Yeah.
So we talked about vacancy rates, about commercial properties in downtown. So that means it's not a good idea to invest in them? Or...
Well, commercial is a whole separate thing. We don't really cover that all that much. Like, we don't work with commercial, like commercial residential, yes, but not full commercial.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would not buy a commercial property right now if it were me in Calgary right now. It's 25-30% vacancy.
Yeah.
At least,
be a rough
at
road
least for
for a
office
while,
space.
right?
Right?
So-
That vacancy is for office space. So yeah. If you're really into commercial investing, industrial is the place to do some research into. There's high demand for industrial space right now. So yeah.
One more. And
Okay.
we'll
One
wrap
more
it up.
question,
So,
and then we'll wrap it up. Yeah.
Will the city impose legalization of illegal suites down the road?
Yeah, so I mean, technically they can do that today already, but they've been turning a blind eye in that amnesty program, right? Because the idea has been like, let's put a carrot and hope people take it. But they've been pretty clear, actually. City planner we talked to has been pretty clear that the city wants to start to crack down next year once that program is over. Honestly, that's the one I have a hard time to truly believe that they'll actually be that active about cracking down, given the affordability issue we have right now. That being said, one thing they will for sure do, because they already do that, is if you get a complaint, they have to, right? So if a tenant complains, neighbor complaint, for sure they will shut down that suite, and you can actually be subject to fines as well, right? If you've got fire safety violations, you can have fines related to that. But the city has said they would crack down. What I think is going to happen is if our rental market eventually balances out a bit, they might start to be more active about it. But that's my crystal ball, right? They might decide to be active anyway, and who knows, right?
Yeah, and what we've heard so far is in cases where they do enforce, the fines are going to be depending on the how illegal is this illegal suite type thing. So if all your suite doesn't have is it doesn't meet parking requirements, that's just a bylaw violation. Whereas if you don't have parking and you don't have an egress window in your bedroom, now that's a city bylaw violation and a fire code violation. And then if the rest of the suite is also in shambles, then you get a building code violation as well, right? So
Okay, so thanks a lot.